The screaming never stops echoing in the corridors of the fortress, monastery, and today, it might be yours. If you've ever wondered what separates a true warrior from mere flesh, subscribe to this channel for the most brutal truths the Imperium doesn't want you to know. You wake to the sound of your own heartbeat thundering in your ears, but something is wrong. The rhythm is different. Too fast, too strong, as if something alien has crawled inside your chest and made itself at home. The stone beneath you is cold enough to burn your skin, yet you cannot feel it properly. Everything is wrong. Everything hurts. This is day 137 since the chaplains came to your world. The memory feels like a lifetime ago, though your body, what remains of it, tells you it has been less than 5 months. You were different then. You had a name that meant something to people who cared, whether you lived or died. You had friends who would recognize your face. You had a mother who kissed your forehead and told you the Emperor protects. She was wrong. The Emperor doesn't protect. The Emperor consumes. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning, to when you still believed you were human. The chaplains arrived on Mortis II during the Feast of Saint Macharius. Their drop pods screaming through the atmosphere, like black meteors of judgment. Your world was nothing special, a mining colony on the rim of the Segmentum Solar. Notable only for the quality of its promethium and the stubbornness of its people. 12 billion souls scraped out their existence in the deep tunnels, dreaming of sunlight they would never see. You were 16 standard years old, which made you ancient by recruitment standards. Most aspirants are selected between the ages of 10 and 14, when their bodies are still malleable enough to accept the gene seed without immediate rejection. But Mortis VI was dying, choked by its own industry, and the chapter needed fresh blood, desperately enough to lower their standards. The selection process began with the trials of flesh. They herded every male between the ages of 12 and 18 into the central plaza, a concrete wasteland that had never seen rain. 50,000 boys, from the youngest tunnel runners to the oldest HAB block enforcers. You remember the smell, fear, sweat and industrial lubricants, the metallic tang of blood from those who had tried to run and been dragged back by servo skulls. Chaplain Mortius stood before the crowd like a monument to war itself. His power armor was the color of dried blood, adorned with purity seals that whispered in languages dead before humanity reached for the stars. When he spoke, his voice resonated through vox amplifiers that made your bones ache. Children of the Emperor, he began, and even through the mechanical distortion, you could hear the contempt in his voice. You have lived your lives in darkness, grubbing in the dirt like the vermin you are. Today you are offered a chance at transcendence. Today, you may die for something greater than yourselves. The first trial was simple: survive. They released the cyber hounds at dawn. These were not the sleek hunting beasts of the nobility, but twisted amalgamations of flesh and machine. Their neural networks programmed with a simple directive: kill everything that moves too slowly. Their howls echoed off the HAB block walls as they poured into the plaza like a tide of chrome and fangs. You ran. Everyone ran, but running wasn't enough. The hounds were faster, stronger, designed by tech marines who understood the physics of terror. Within minutes, the plaza was painted red with the blood of boys who had been too slow, too weak, too human. You survived because you were lucky, because when young Matthias Cole, a boy you had shared ration packs within the tunnels, stumbled and fell beside you, you didn't stop to help him. You heard his screams as the cyber hounds found him, heard the wet sounds of tearing flesh and breaking bone, and you kept running. That was your first lesson in becoming a space marine, compassion is weakness, and weakness is death. By the end of the first day, 47,000 boys were dead. 3,000 remained, huddled in whatever shelter they could find, waiting for the next trial. The trials of mind began at midnight. They injected each survivor with a cocktail of combat stimulants and psychoactive compounds that made reality bend at the edges. Then they sealed you in sensory deprivation chambers, coffins of black metal that cut off all sight, sound, and sensation except pain. The hallucinations started within hours. You saw your dead friends rise from pools of blood, their eyes replaced with burning coals, their mouths opening to vomit forth accusations of cowardice and betrayal. You saw your mother, her face melting like wax, reaching for you with arms that stretched across impossible distances. You saw the Emperor himself, a golden giant whose radiance burned away your skin and left your soul naked and screaming. Some boys broke immediately, their minds snapping like overstressed cables. You could hear them through the chamber walls, laughing, sobbing, screaming prayers to gods that had abandoned humanity 10,000 years ago. The servo, skulls collected their bodies every few hours, making room for the silence that followed madness. You lasted 6 days. 6 days of reliving every moment of cowardice in your life, every small cruelty, every time you had chosen your own survival over someone else's welfare. 6 days of confronting the fundamental truth that you were not special, not chosen, not blessed by the Emperor's grace. Just another piece of meat that happened to be slightly more durable than the rest. When they finally opened your chamber, you were different. Not broken. The broken ones were already dead, but changed. The boy who had entered the chamber had possessed illusions about honor, about heroism, about the righteousness of the Imperium. The thing that crawled out understood that honor was a luxury for those who could afford it, and that righteousness was whatever kept you alive long enough to serve the Emperor's will. 1,000 boys remained. The trials of faith were worse than pain or madness, because they required you to choose. They brought you to the Cathedral of St. Macarius, where the stained glass windows depicted the saint's conquest of 1,000 worlds. The windows were beautiful, works of art that had taken centuries to complete, depicting scenes of triumph and glory that made the heart soar with imperial pride. Then, they handed each of you a hammer. Faith, Chaplain Mortius explained, is not belief in what is beautiful. Faith is the willingness to destroy beauty in service of a higher purpose. The Emperor cares nothing for your appreciation of art, your aesthetic sensibilities, your sentimental attachments to the past. The Emperor demands only obedience. The order was simple: destroy the windows. Some boys refused immediately. They spoke of heritage, of culture, of the sin of destroying something so beautiful. The chaplains executed them on the spot, bolt pistol rounds turning their heads into red mist that spattered across the cathedral floor. Others swung their hammers with obvious reluctance, shattering the glass with tears streaming down their faces. These boys lived, but they were marked. The chaplains noted their hesitation, their weakness, their inability to embrace necessary destruction without emotional attachment. You brought your hammer down without hesitation. The glass exploded in a shower of colored fragments that caught the light like falling stars. Each window you destroyed was a masterpiece, irreplaceable, a testament to human creativity and devotion that had survived centuries of war and upheaval. And you destroyed them all with the methodical efficiency of a machine. Because that was what the Emperor required. By the time the trial ended, the cathedral floor was ankle deep in broken glass, and 500 boys were dead. The trials of will came next, and they were the cruelest yet. They showed you picked feeds from your home world. Not the present, the past. Scenes of your life before the chaplains came, moments of happiness and peace that seemed impossibly distant now. Your mother preparing your favorite meal, your friends playing in the tunnels, their laughter echoing off the walls. The girl you had kissed behind the Prometheum refinery, her lips soft and warm against yours. This is what you are choosing to leave behind, Chaplain Mortius explained. Not just life, but everything that makes life worth living. Love, friendship, simple pleasures, the hope of a future beyond war. These things are not evil, but they are incompatible with service to the Emperor. Choose now, return to your old life, or surrender it forever. The choice seemed impossible. To go back meant safety, comfort, the possibility of happiness. To stay meant pain, transformation, the likelihood of death in service to an empire that would never remember your name. Half the remaining boys chose to go home. They were not executed. That would have been a mercy. Instead, they were subjected to mind-wipe procedures that erased their memories of the trials, then dumped back on their homeworld with neural implants that would ensure their absolute loyalty to the Imperium. They would live long lives as model citizens, productive members of society, who would never question orders, never rebel, never dream of anything beyond their designated role. They had chosen safety, and safety was the death of the soul. You chose to stay. 250 boys remained, and the real trials were about to begin. The first surgical procedure was simple. The installation of neural interfaces, but would allow direct communication between your brain and the chapter's data networks. They drilled holes in your skull without anesthetic. Pain was part of the process, a reminder that weakness had to be burned away with suffering. The neural interfaces felt like ice picks driven into your brain. Every thought was suddenly visible to the tech marines, every memory accessible to the chaplains. Privacy was a concept that no longer applied to you. Your mind belonged to the chapter now, just another piece of equipment to be maintained and upgraded as necessary. The second procedure was the installation of the secondary heart. They cut open your chest with surgical precision, spreading your ribs like the pages of a book. The secondary heart was a thing of metal and flesh, a bio-mechanical hybrid that would pump liquid fire through your veins for the rest of your existence. The installation process took 14 hours, during which you remained conscious, watching as the apothecaries rebuilt your cardiovascular system from the inside out. When they activated the secondary heart, the pain was indescribable. Your blood pressure doubled instantly, sending waves of agony through every nerve in your body. Your original heart struggled to match the rhythm of its artificial twin, creating an arrhythmic thunder that made your ribs vibrate. Several boys died during the procedure, their bodies unable to adapt to the sudden changes in circulation. You survived, though survival felt more like a punishment than a reward. The third procedure was the implantation of the ossmodula, the organ that would strengthen your bones and allow them to grow throughout your extended lifetime. The installation required them to drill into your major bones and insert bio-mechanical seeds that would eventually fuse with your skeletal structure. The process took 3 days. 3 days of lying immobilized while drills bored into your femurs, your ribs, your spine. 3 days of feeling your bones crack and heal and crack again as the ossmodula began its work. By the end of the procedure, your skeleton was no longer entirely human, shot through with metallic threads that made your bones ring like bells when struck. 50 boys died during the ossmodula implantation, their bodies rejecting the foreign tissue in spectacular fashion. Their bones grew wild and uncontrolled, piercing their organs and erupting from their skin in grotesque parodies of antlers or thorns. You watched them die, their screams echoing through the apothecarian, as the apothecaries made clinical notes about rejection rates and genetic compatibility. The fourth procedure was the installation of the biscopea, the muscle-enhancing organ that would give you the superhuman strength necessary to serve as a space marine. The biscopea was a living thing, a mass of modified muscle tissue that interfaced directly with your nervous system. They inserted it through an incision in your back, threading it between your shoulder blades like a parasite taking root. The moment it activated, your muscles began to swell and harden, growing denser and more efficient with each passing hour. The pain was constant, a burning sensation that spread through your entire body as your musculature rebuilt itself, according to new specifications. Your strength increased dramatically, but so did your appetite. The biscopea required massive amounts of protein to fuel its growth, forcing you to consume rations that would have fed a normal human for a week. Your digestive system struggled to keep pace, cramping and spasming as it adapted to the increased workload. 20 boys died during the biscopea implantation, their bodies consuming themselves in their hunger for protein. They became living skeletons, their enhanced muscles cannibalizing their organs in desperate attempts to sustain their growth. The apothecaries recorded their deaths with the same clinical detachment they showed for everything else. The fifth procedure was the installation of the haemostamen, the blood enhancement organ that would make your circulatory system more efficient and resistant to toxins. The haemostamen was surgically grafted to your secondary heart, creating a complex network of filters and processors that would screen your blood for impurities. The installation required them to drain most of your blood, replacing it with a synthetic substitute while they performed the surgery. You spent 6 hours in a state of clinical death, your consciousness suspended, while the apothecaries rebuilt your cardiovascular system. When they restored your blood supply, it felt like liquid fire flowing through your veins. The new blood was more than human blood. It was a cocktail of hormones, antibodies, and chemical enhancers that would allow you to survive in environments that would kill normal humans instantly. But it came at a cost. The enhanced blood was addictive, creating a euphoric high that made normal human emotions seem pale and distant. 30 boys died during the haemostamen implantation, their hearts unable to process the enhanced blood. They went into convulsions, their bodies rejecting the foreign substances with violent spasms that shattered their enhanced bones. The apothecaries added their deaths to the growing list of acceptable casualties. By now, only 120 boys remained, and you were no longer recognizably human. Your body had grown to nearly 7 feet in height, your muscles swollen with unnatural strength. Your bones were dense as steel. Your blood ran thick with combat enhancers. Your heart thundered with the rhythm of a machine built for war. But the physical changes were nothing compared to what was happening to your mind. The neural interfaces had begun to integrate with your consciousness, filling your thoughts with tactical data, equipment specifications, and strategic assessments. You found yourself analyzing every room for defensive positions, every person for threat potential, every situation for its military applications. The boy who had once dreamed of seeing real sunlight was gone, replaced by a living weapon that calculated angles of fire and estimated casualty rates. The sixth procedure was the installation of the Larraman's organ, which would allow your blood to clot instantly when exposed to air. They implanted it near your primary heart, where it would have direct access to your enhanced blood supply. The procedure required them to induce massive trauma to test the organ's effectiveness. They cut you open in dozens of places, monitoring how quickly each wound sealed itself. the Laraman's organ worked perfectly, creating instant scabs that hardened into temporary armor. But the testing process was agonizing, each cut a reminder of your new nature, as a being designed to endure punishment that would kill normal humans. The seventh procedure was the installation of the catalepsine node, which would allow you to remain conscious and alert, even while your body rested. They installed it at the base of your skull, threading neural connections directly into your brain stem. The node felt like a constant electric current running through your head. Sleep became impossible in the traditional sense. Instead, you entered periods of reduced activity, where half your brain rested, while the other half remained vigilant. Dreams became confused with waking thoughts, creating a perpetual state of semi-consciousness that bordered on madness. 15 boys died during the catalepsine implantation, their minds unable to adapt to the constant state of partial awareness. They became catatonic, their consciousness trapped in an endless loop of half-formed thoughts and fragmented memories. The apothecaries terminated them with bolt pistol rounds to the head, noting their deaths as neurological incompatibilities. The eighth procedure was the installation of the priomna, a digestive stomach that would allow you to consume and derive nutrition from virtually anything organic. They installed it as a secondary stomach, connected to your esophagus by a series of bypass valves. The priomna was a living acid bath, capable of breaking down materials that would be toxic or indigestible to normal humans. But its installation required them to restructure your entire digestive system, moving organs and rerouting connections in ways that left you in constant pain for weeks. They tested the priomna by feeding you increasingly toxic substances, industrial lubricants, poisonous plants, even small amounts of metal. Each test was agony, as the organ learned to process new materials, but gradually you developed the ability to survive on resources that would kill normal humans. The ninth procedure was the installation of the omophaga, the organ that would allow you to absorb memories and genetic information by consuming the flesh of others. They implanted it in your brain stem, where it interfaced directly with your neural pathways. The omophagia was perhaps the most disturbing of all the organs, as it fundamentally changed your relationship with other living beings. Every creature became a potential source of information, every enemy a library to be consumed. The organ filled your dreams with the memories of animals you had eaten during training, creating a chaotic jumble of foreign experiences that made it difficult to distinguish your own thoughts from those of others. The 10th procedure was the installation of the multi-lung, a third lung that would allow you to breathe in toxic atmospheres and survive in the vacuum of space. They installed it alongside your existing lungs, requiring them to restructure your entire chest cavity to accommodate the additional organ. The multi-lung felt like having a bellows installed in your chest, constantly inflating and deflating according to atmospheric conditions. It allowed you to filter out toxins and process oxygen more efficiently. But the constant pressure changes created a persistent ache that never fully went away. 25 boys died during the multi-lung installation, their respiratory systems unable to coordinate the complex interactions between 3 separate breathing organs. They suffocated slowly, their lungs working against each other in futile attempts to process air. The apothecaries recorded their deaths as respiratory incompatibilities. By this point, only 60 boys remained, and you had been transformed into something that bore little resemblance to humanity. Your body was a living weapon, enhanced and modified to survive in conditions that would kill normal humans instantly. But the physical transformations were only the beginning. The real horror was what was happening to your mind. The neural interfaces had begun to integrate more deeply with your consciousness, overlaying your thoughts with tactical assessments and strategic calculations. You found yourself viewing other people not as individuals but as resources to be deployed or obstacles to be eliminated. Emotions became tactical considerations. Fear was inefficiency, love was a vulnerability, mercy was a strategic error. The chaplains began the process of indoctrination in earnest. They filled your days with combat training, weapons instruction, and tactical education. But between the lessons in warfare, they conducted sessions they called spiritual counseling. Extended periods where they systematically dismantled your remaining human attachments and rebuilt your psychology around absolute loyalty to the Emperor. The process began with confession. They forced you to recount every moment of your life before recruitment, analyzing each memory for signs of weakness, doubt, or insufficient devotion. Every friend you had loved became evidence of misplaced loyalty. Every moment of happiness became proof of selfish concern for personal pleasure over duty to the Emperor. They made you understand that your previous life had been a lie, a comfortable delusion that had prevented you from seeing the universe as it truly was. A place of endless war, where only the strongest survived, and only the most devoted earned the right to serve. The second phase was isolation. They separated the remaining recruits, placing each in solitary confinement for months at a time. The isolation was designed to break down your sense of individual identity, forcing you to confront the emptiness that existed at the core of your being without the distractions of human companionship. During isolation, the only human contact you had was with the chaplains, who visited regularly to continue your indoctrination. They became your only source of human interaction, your only connection to meaning and purpose. Gradually, you began to crave their approval, to structure your thoughts around the principles they taught, to define yourself entirely in terms of your service to the chapter. The third phase was reconstruction. They began to rebuild your identity around the concept of duty, not duty to humanity. That was too abstract, too diffuse to provide reliable motivation. Duty to the chapter, to your battle brothers, to the specific mission of your particular brotherhood. They taught you the chapter's history, its traditions, its heroes and martyrs. They gave you new names, new identities, based on your role in the chapter hierarchy. Your old name, the name your mother had given you, the name your friends had called you, was declared dead, buried with the weak human boy you had once been. You became brother. Initiate Severus of the 10th Company, 3rd Squad, Tactical Designation 7-7, Alpha. Your identity was now defined entirely by your function. Your purpose reduced to a series of numbers and letters that described your role in the chapter's order of battle. The fourth phase was integration. They introduced you to the other survivors, now your battle brothers, men who had undergone the same transformation and emerged equally changed. You were organized into squads, trained to function as a single organism with multiple bodies, each individual subsumed into the collective identity of the unit. The bonds formed during this phase were stronger than any human relationship, forged in shared suffering and reinforced by biochemical imperatives, built into your enhanced physiology. Your battle brothers became extensions of yourself, their thoughts and intentions as familiar as your own. Individual survival became meaningless compared to the survival of the squad. But even as you bonded with your battle brothers, you learned to view all other forms of life with cold calculation. Civilians were resources to be protected or expendable obstacles to be cleared, depending on tactical requirements. Enemy soldiers were problems to be solved with appropriate applications of violence. Even other imperial forces were potential complications that might interfere with mission objectives. The final phase was consecration. In a ceremony that lasted 3 days and 3 nights, the surviving recruits, now numbering only 47, received the gene seed that would complete their transformation into true space marines. The gene seed was the genetic legacy of your primarch, the superhuman demigod who had led your chapter in the ancient days before the Horus heresy. The implantation of the gene seed was the most dangerous procedure of all. The genetic material was ancient and unstable, accumulated mutations and degradations, making it increasingly incompatible with human physiology. Many recruits died during implantation, their bodies rejecting the foreign genetic material in catastrophic fashion. You survived, though the process left you fundamentally altered at the genetic level. The gene seed rewrote your DNA, optimizing your enhanced organs and creating new capabilities that pushed you beyond the boundaries of human possibility. But it also severed your last connections to humanity, making you something else entirely. A posthuman warrior, monk devoted to an empire that had forgotten what it meant to be human. When the transformation was complete, you stood 8 feet tall and weighed nearly half a ton. Your strength was sufficient to crush steel with your bare hands. Your reflexes fast enough to dodge bolter rounds. Your endurance great enough to fight for days without rest. Your senses were enhanced to superhuman levels, capable of seeing in total darkness and hearing conversations through solid walls. But the physical enhancements were insignificant compared to the mental changes. Your consciousness had been rebuilt around concepts of duty, honor, and service that would have been alien to your former self. You thought in tactical assessments and strategic calculations, viewing every situation through the lens of military necessity. Emotions still existed, but they had been channeled into approved forms. Righteous anger at the enemies of the Emperor, protective loyalty toward your battle brothers, cold satisfaction in the execution of duty. The boy who had once kissed a girl behind the Prometheum refinery was dead. In his place stood brother, Initiate Severus, a weapon in human form, a living extension of the Emperor's will. Your first mission came 6 months after your transformation was complete. The world of Corbenic Prime had fallen to a chaos cult, its population corrupted by the whispers of daemon princes who promised power in exchange for souls. The planetary government had collapsed, replaced by a theocracy devoted to the worship of entities that fed on suffering and despair. Your squad was assigned to a strike team, tasked with infiltrating the capital city and eliminating the cult's leadership. It was classified as a reconnaissance mission, but everyone understood that reconnaissance meant kill everything that moves and let the Emperor sort out the innocent. The insertion was flawless. Your drop pod screamed through the atmosphere like a meteor, its heat shields glowing white, hot as it carved through the planet's defensive grid. The impact crater it left in the city center was 30 feet deep and perfectly circular, a testament to the precision of Imperial engineering. You emerged from the pod with your bolter ready, scanning for targets with enhanced senses that could detect the biochemical signatures of corruption. The city around you was a hellscape of twisted architecture and screaming citizens, buildings warped into impossible shapes by the influence of the warp. The first cultists you encountered were barely recognizable as human. Chaos mutation had transformed them into things of horn and claw, their minds dissolved in madness and religious ecstasy. They charged your position with improvised weapons and inhuman battle cries, seeking martyrdom in service to their dark gods. You killed them without hesitation or remorse. Your bolter spoke with the voice of righteous fury, each round an explosive shell designed to pulverize whatever it struck. Cultists exploded in showers of gore and bone fragments, their corrupted flesh unable to withstand the Emperor's wrath made manifest. Within minutes, the street was carpeted with the dead, their blood steaming in the acidic air. But the killing brought no satisfaction, no sense of accomplishment or justice served. It was simply another task completed, another tactical objective achieved. The cultists were problems that had been solved with appropriate applications of violence. Their deaths were no more meaningful than the destruction of malfunctioning machinery. The mission continued for 6 days, during which your squad methodically eliminated every cultist stronghold in the city. You learned to fight in urban environments, using the broken architecture as cover while you advanced from position to position. You learned to coordinate with your battle brothers, moving as a single organism with multiple bodies, each warrior's actions perfectly synchronized with the others. You also learned to ignore the screams of civilians caught in the crossfire. Imperial doctrine was clear on this point. The corruption of chaos spread through contact, and anyone who had been exposed to the cultists' influence was potentially compromised. Better to eliminate possible threats than risk allowing corruption to spread to other worlds. The death of innocents was regrettable but necessary, an acceptable cost in the eternal war against the forces of darkness. On the 6th day, you reached the cathedral where the cult's high priest conducted his blasphemous rituals. The building had been transformed by chaos influence into a living thing, its walls pulsing with veins that carried liquid fire instead of blood. The air inside was thick with the psychic screams of sacrificial victims, their souls torn apart to fuel the daemon prince that served as the cult's patron. The final battle was everything your training had prepared you for, and nothing your human memories could have imagined. The high priest was no longer human, if he had ever been human at all. Chaos mutation had transformed him into a thing of impossible geometry, his body existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Looking at him directly caused vertigo and nausea as your enhanced vision tried to process angles that didn't exist in normal space. He spoke in voices that bypassed your ears and resonated directly in your brain, promising power, knowledge, and freedom from the false emperor, who demanded only obedience and death. For a moment, just a moment, you felt the pull of his words, the seductive whisper of possibilities, beyond the narrow confines of duty and service. Then your conditioning kicked in, and the moment passed. You opened fire with your bolter, sending explosive rounds into the daemon prince's shifting form. Each impact tore away pieces of corrupted flesh, revealing the metallic skeleton beneath. But the creature regenerated almost instantly, drawing power from the warp to repair its wounds. The battle lasted for hours, your squad working in perfect coordination to slowly wear down the daemon's defenses. You learned to fight enemies that existed partially outside normal reality, adjusting your tactics to account for creatures that could move through walls and attack from impossible angles. Finally, brother, Sergeant Marcus landed the killing blow with his power sword, the blessed blade carving through the daemon prince's neck with surgical precision. The creature's death scream shattered every window in the cathedral, and its body collapsed into a puddle of burning echre that ate through the floor like acid. The mission was declared a success. The cult was eliminated, the corruption purged, the planet rendered safe for Imperial colonization. You and your squad were commended for your efficiency and dedication to duty. But late at night, in the quiet moments between missions, you sometimes remembered the daemon prince's words, not the blasphemous promises or the heretical philosophy, but the simple fact that it had offered you a choice. For the first time since your recruitment, Something had suggested that there might be alternatives to the path of absolute obedience you had been trained to follow. You buried these thoughts deep, recognizing them as potential seeds of corruption that could compromise your loyalty to the chapter. But they remained, like splinters in your consciousness, reminders of the human boy who had once dreamed of sunlight and freedom. Your second mission took you to the world of Valhalla Prime, where an Ork war had established a foothold in the northern continent. The greenskin invasion had been detected early, before it could spread beyond the initial landing sites. But Imperial Command wanted the threat eliminated with extreme prejudice. Fighting Orks was different from fighting cultists, where chaos worshippers were driven by religious fervor and dark inspiration. Orks were motivated by simple joy in destruction and violence. They fought because fighting was fun, killed because killing made them happy, and died because death in battle was the ultimate expression of their racial identity. In some ways, this made them more honest enemies than the cultists had been. Your squad was assigned to a company, Strength Assault on the Ork Stronghold, a ramshackle fortress built from crashed spacecraft and industrial wreckage. The approach required crossing 20 miles of open terrain under constant bombardment from Ork artillery, massive guns that fired shells the size of drop pods with gleeful inaccuracy. The advance took 3 days, during which you learned to move across contested ground while under fire. You learned to read the terrain for cover and concealment, to coordinate with heavy weapons teams and air support, to maintain unit cohesion, even when enemy fire was turning your battle brothers into smoking craters. You also learned to hate the Orks with a cold, professional hatred that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with tactical efficiency. Orks were strong, tough, and numerous, but they were also disorganized and prone to infighting. Their technology was crude but effective, their tactics simple but devastatingly direct. They represented everything the Imperium stood against: chaos without purpose, violence without discipline, destruction without meaning. The assault on the Ork stronghold began at dawn on the 4th day, with a coordinated bombardment from orbital platforms that turned the outer defenses into molten slag. Your company advanced through the breach in perfect formation, bolters firing in carefully controlled bursts that maximized ammunition efficiency while maintaining suppressive fire. The Orks met you with enthusiasm that bordered on ecstasy. They charged your positions with axes and clubs, roaring battle cries in their guttural language, seeking glorious death in combat with the legendary Space Marines. Their courage was undeniable, their ferocity impressive, but courage and ferocity were no match for disciplined firepower and superior equipment. You killed them by the hundreds, your bolter never jamming or misfiring, each round finding its target with mechanical precision. Ork blood soaked into the ground beneath your feet, creating a muddy paste that made footing treacherous, but didn't slow your advance. The battle raged for 18 hours, during which you learned to fight in close quarters against enemies who were physically stronger than you, but less disciplined and coordinated. You learned to use your enhanced reflexes and tactical training to overcome raw physical advantages, to exploit weaknesses in enemy formations while maintaining perfect unit cohesion with your battle brothers. When the fighting finally ended, the Ork stronghold was a smoking ruin populated only by corpses, and the occasional surviving greenskin, too wounded to continue fighting. Your company had suffered 12 casualties, acceptable losses for an engagement of this scale, while eliminating an estimated 3,000 enemy combatants. The victory was tactically significant, but strategically routine. Just another successful mission, another threat neutralized. Another world made safe for imperial rule. But as you walked through the aftermath of the battle, stepping over the bodies of enemies, who had died with smiles on their faces, you found yourself thinking about the nature of joy. The Orks had found genuine happiness in violence and destruction, taking pleasure in activities that you approached with cold professionalism. They had died laughing, while you killed without feeling. Who, you wondered in a moment of dangerous introspection, was truly alive? The thought was heretical, a sign of potential corruption that should have been reported to the chaplains immediately. Instead, you buried it alongside your other dangerous memories, adding another splinter to your collection of forbidden thoughts. Your third mission brought you face to face with the most dangerous enemy of all other space marines. The Angel's Penitent, a successor chapter of the Blood Angels, had been declared excommunicate traitoris by the High Lords of Terror. Their crime was refusing to surrender a relic weapon that the Inquisition claimed was tainted by chaos corruption. The Angel's Penitent argued that the weapon was a sacred artifact of their Primarch, too valuable to be destroyed by paranoid inquisitors who saw corruption in every shadow. The argument might have had merit, but the High Lords had spoken, and their word was law. Your chapter was tasked with hunting down the renegade Marines and recovering or destroying the contested relic. It was a mission that struck at the heart of everything you had been taught about brotherhood and loyalty, forcing you to choose between competing definitions of duty. The Angel's Penitent had established a base of operations on the dead world of Nemesis Tessara, a planet that had been subjected to exterminators centuries earlier, but still retained a breathable atmosphere. Your strike cruiser, the Hammer of Righteousness, approached the planet under stealth protocols, its machine spirit programmed to avoid detection by the Renegade's sensor arrays. The insertion was more complex than your previous missions, requiring your squad to perform a high-altitude drop through radiation storms left over from the planet's sterilization. The power armor's machine spirit guided you through the electromagnetic chaos, its navigation systems compensating for interference that would have scattered conventional forces across hundreds of miles. You landed in what had once been a major city, now reduced to glassed craters and twisted metal spires that reached toward a sky the color of dried blood. The gauger counter built into your helmet clicked constantly, registering radiation levels that would have killed normal humans within minutes. But your enhanced physiology and power armor's protective systems made you immune to such mundane threats. The Angel's Penitent had chosen their hiding place well. The ruins provided excellent cover for their operations, while the residual radiation made orbital surveillance nearly impossible. Your squad would have to locate and engage them using ground-level reconnaissance, a slow and dangerous process that played to the Renegade's defensive advantages. Brother, Sergeant Marcus divided the squad into two-man teams, each responsible for searching a different sector of the ruined city. You were paired with Brother Cassius, a veteran of 47 successful missions, whose left arm had been replaced with a bionic prosthetic after an encounter with tyrannid bio-weapons. Cassius was everything you aspired to become: utterly loyal, coldly efficient, incapable of doubt or hesitation in the execution of his duties. He had served the chapter for 63 years without a single disciplinary action or moment of wavering faith. His record was perfect, his devotion absolute, which made what happened next so much worse. You found the Angel's Penitent in the ruins of what had once been a cathedral, though it was impossible to tell which saint or aspect of the Emperor it had once honored. The building's walls had been melted and reformed by the exterminatus bombardment, creating organic curves that reminded you uncomfortably of the chaos corrupted architecture you had seen on Corbenic Prime. The renegade Marines had established a defensive perimeter around their makeshift fortress, using portable shield generators and heavy weapons emplacements to create overlapping fields of fire. They were clearly expecting an attack, their preparations professional and thorough. But they weren't expecting Brother Cassius. As you and your partner observed the enemy positions through magnification scopes, calculating firing angles and identifying weak points in their defenses, Cassius activated his Vox link on an encrypted frequency that wasn't monitored by the chapter's command structure. "Brother, Captain Mordecai," he whispered into his helmet's communication array. "This is Cassius. The hunt has begun." The response came through the same encrypted channel, crackling with static but clearly audible. "Understood, old friend. The Emperor protects." You stared at Cassius in shock, your enhanced mind struggling to process what you had just witnessed. Your battle, brother, the perfect space marine, whose loyalty you had never questioned, was in communication with the enemy. The implications were staggering, threatening to collapse the entire framework of certainty upon which your existence was built. Cassius turned to face you, his helmet's optical lenses glowing like red stars in the dim light. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of doubt and carefully concealed heresy. "The relic they seek is not corrupted," he said quietly. "I have seen it with my own eyes, felt its power with my own hands. It is a fragment of our Primarch's own sword, blessed by the Emperor himself during the Great Crusade. The Inquisition seeks to destroy it not because it is tainted, but because it represents power they cannot control. You should have killed him immediately. The moment a space marine revealed himself as a traitor, duty demanded his immediate execution. Your bolt pistol was loaded and ready, your enhanced reflexes more than fast enough to put a round through his head before he could react. But you hesitated, not because you believed his words. That would have been heresy beyond forgiveness. But because his betrayal represented something you had thought impossible. Cassius was perfect, the ideal toward which all space marines aspired. If someone like him could fall to corruption, what did that say about the reliability of the system that had created you both? "The angels penitent are not traitors," Cassius continued, his voice carrying a conviction that made your enhanced hearing detect the slight tremor of suppressed emotion. "They are loyal servants of the Emperor, who refuse to surrender a sacred relic to men who have forgotten what loyalty means. In hunting them, we serve not the Emperor, but the ambitions of mortals, who seek to control what they cannot understand." The words were seductive in their simplicity, offering explanations for doubts you had barely admitted to yourself. But they were also poison, thoughts that would lead inevitably to damnation and disgrace. You raised your bolt pistol, the weapon's machine spirit humming with eagerness to serve. "Brother Cassius," you said, your voice distorted by the helmet's vox, grill into something mechanical and inhuman. "You speak heresy. Retract your words and submit to chaplain interrogation, or die as a traitor deserves." Cassius smiled, an expression visible through his helmet's transparent faceplate. It was the first genuinely human expression you had seen from a space marine in years, untainted by the cold professionalism that defined your existence. "I had hoped you would understand," he said sadly. "But you are still young, still certain of the righteousness of our cause. Perhaps in time, you would have come to see the truth as I have. But time is a luxury we cannot afford." He activated a signal beacon hidden in his armor, sending a coded transmission to the angels' penitent positions. Within seconds, the ruined cathedral erupted in activity as the renegade Marines prepared for battle. You put 3 bolt rounds through Cassius's chest, the explosive shells detonating inside his power armor and reducing his torso to bloody fragments. He died without crying out, his face maintaining that same peaceful smile, even as his enhanced biology shut down system by system. But even as his body collapsed, you could hear his final words echoing through your vox link. The Emperor protects, Brother Severus, even from his own servants. The battle that followed was unlike anything in your training or previous experience. Fighting other space marines required entirely different tactics from engaging cultists or orcs. Your enemies possessed the same enhanced reflexes, the same tactical training, the same superior equipment that you did. Every advantage you had grown accustomed to was neutralized, leaving only raw skill and determination to decide the outcome. The angels penitent fought with the desperate courage of men who knew they were already damned in the eyes of the Imperium. They had chosen their path knowing it would lead to death or exile, and they embraced that fate with grim professionalism. Their bolt rounds were as accurate as yours, their movements as precise, their coordination as flawless. But they were outnumbered, and numbers eventually told. The battle lasted for 6 hours, during which you learned what it meant to fight enemies who were your equals in every measurable way. You learned to use cover more effectively, to coordinate with your remaining battle brothers in ways that maximized your collective firepower while minimizing your exposure to enemy weapons. You also learned what it felt like to kill men who died with prayers to the Emperor on their lips. The angels penitent never surrendered, never wavered in their conviction that they served the true will of the Emperor, even as they died under the guns of his loyal servants. Their last words were litanies of faith, their final acts attempts to protect the sacred relic they had died defending. When the shooting finally stopped, you found yourself standing in a cathedral full of corpses, surrounded by the bodies of space marines, whose only crime had been loving the Emperor too much to surrender a piece of his legacy to those they considered unworthy. The relic itself was everything Cassius had claimed, a fragment of ancient metal that hummed with barely contained power, its surface inscribed with high Gothic prayers that predated the current Imperium by thousands of years. Holding it, you could feel the psychic resonance of its creation, the echo of the Emperor's own will given physical form. It was beautiful. It was pure. It was everything the Inquisition had claimed it was not. And you destroyed it anyway. The melter charge reduced the relic to a puddle of molten metal within seconds, its sacred inscriptions dissolving into shapeless slag. The psychic scream that accompanied its destruction was audible even through your helmet's audio filters, a sound like the death of hope itself. Mission accomplished. Threat neutralized. Another victory for the Imperium of man. But as you stood in the ruins of the cathedral, surrounded by the bodies of men who had died defending something beautiful, you felt something crack inside your chest. Not physically. Your enhanced physiology was functioning perfectly, but spiritually, psychologically, in whatever part of you still remembered what it meant to be human. For the first time since your recruitment, you began to understand why someone might choose to rebel against the Imperium. Not out of corruption or malice, but out of a desire to preserve something worth preserving in a universe that seemed determined to destroy everything beautiful. The thought was heretical, dangerous, potentially fatal if discovered by the chaplains. But it was also undeniably true, and truth had a way of surviving, even when buried under layers of indoctrination and conditioning. You never reported Cassius's betrayal or his final words. Instead, you wrote in your mission report that he had died heroically defending his battle, brothers from enemy fire, a loyal servant of the Emperor who had made the ultimate sacrifice in service to the chapter. It was a lie, but it was also an act of mercy. The first truly human thing you had done since your transformation began. The years that followed brought more missions, more victories, more opportunities to demonstrate your loyalty to the chapter and the Emperor. You fought chaos cultists on a dozen different worlds, eliminated Ork infestations from Imperial colonies, helped suppress rebellions that threatened the stability of entire star systems. Your service record was exemplary. Your devotion appeared absolute. Your transformation from human boy to posthuman weapon was declared a complete success. But late at night, in the quiet hours between battles, you found yourself remembering things that threatened the foundations of everything you had been taught to believe. The Daemon Prince who had offered you choices, the Orks who had died laughing, Brother Cassius's peaceful smile as he spoke heretical truths, the Angel's Penitent who had died defending something beautiful. Each memory was a splinter in your consciousness, a fragment of doubt that grew larger with each passing year. Individually, they were manageable, minor inconsistencies in an otherwise coherent worldview. Together, they formed a pattern that suggested uncomfortable possibilities about the nature of service, loyalty, and truth. You began to notice things you had previously ignored. The fear in civilians' eyes when Space Marines arrived to protect them, the casual brutality with which Imperial forces treated populations that failed to meet production quotas, the way the chaplain's sermons focused more on obedience than on the Emperor's original vision of human unity and progress. Most disturbing of all, you began to notice the changes in your battle brothers as the years wore on. Veterans who had served for decades developed a hollow quality, their enhanced physiology maintaining their bodies, while something indefinable withered away inside their minds. They became increasingly mechanical in their responses, more predictable in their tactical decisions, less capable of the creative thinking that had once made Space Marines so effective. The chapter's apothecaries called it battle fatigue and treated it with additional conditioning and pharmaceutical interventions. But you began to suspect it was something else entirely. The inevitable result of a system that demanded the complete surrender of individual identity in service to collective purpose. You were becoming like them, you realized with growing horror. Each mission left you a little less human, a little more machine, like in your responses to moral complexity. The boy who had once dreamed of sunlight was dying by degrees, replaced by a weapon that calculated optimal kill ratios and assessed threats with mechanical precision. The realization should have driven you to seek help from the chaplains, to submit to additional conditioning that would eliminate these dangerous thoughts and restore your psychological equilibrium. Instead, it made you determined to preserve whatever remained of your original self, to maintain some connection to the human boy whose death had been declared necessary for your transformation into a Space Marine. You began to keep a journal, hidden in a memory engram, deep within your neural interfaces, where only you could access it. In this private space, you recorded thoughts and observations that would have been considered heretical if discovered by the chapter's hierarchy. You wrote about the beauty you still found in small things. The way starlight looked through the viewport of a transport ship, the sound of rain on the hull during atmospheric entry, the brief moments of silence between battles when the universe seemed almost peaceful. You wrote about your dreams, those rare periods when your consciousness drifted free from tactical assessments and strategic considerations. In dreams, you were still sometimes the boy who had lived in the tunnels of Mortis Theae, who had friends and family, and hopes for a future that extended beyond war. You wrote about your battle brothers, documenting the slow erosion of their humanity with clinical precision. You noted which ones had stopped making jokes during equipment maintenance, which ones no longer showed any emotion when civilians died in crossfire, which ones had begun to speak exclusively in tactical terminology, even during informal conversations. Most importantly, you wrote about your growing certainty that the Imperium you served was not the same entity that the Emperor had originally created. Somewhere during the 10,000 years since his internment in the Golden Throne, the vision of human unity and progress had been perverted into something else, a totalitarian nightmare that consumed the souls of its defenders as readily as it devoured its enemies. The realization was devastating, calling into question everything you had been taught about duty, loyalty, and service. But it was also liberating, freeing you from the psychological constraints that had defined your existence since recruitment. For the first time in decades, you began to make choices based on your own moral judgments, rather than the chapter's tactical doctrines. The changes were subtle at first, small acts of mercy that didn't compromise mission objectives, moments of compassion that could be justified as maintaining civilian cooperation. You began to warn non-combatants about incoming bombardments, when tactical doctrine called for maintaining operational security. You started providing medical aid to wounded enemies when interrogation procedures were complete. These actions were technically within mission parameters, but they represented a fundamental shift in your motivations. You were no longer killing and destroying because it was your duty, but choosing when and how to exercise the terrible power you had been given. Your battle brothers began to notice the changes, commenting on your inefficient resource allocation and unnecessary concern for collateral damage. The chaplains scheduled additional counseling sessions, during which they probed your psychological state for signs of corruption or wavering faith. You passed every test, answered every question with responses calculated to demonstrate absolute loyalty to the chapter. Your performance in combat remained exemplary, your tactical decisions sound, your devotion apparently unshakable. But deep inside, in the hidden recesses of your consciousness, you were planning something that would have horrified your instructors and condemned you as a traitor beyond redemption. You were planning to leave, not in the dramatic fashion of the angel's penitent, with formal declarations of independence and armed resistance to imperial authority. That path led only to death and the destruction of everything you hoped to preserve. Instead, you would disappear quietly, vanishing during a mission and allowing the chapter to declare you killed in action. The plan took years to develop, requiring careful preparation and meticulous attention to operational security. You identified a mission profile that would provide the necessary cover. A solo reconnaissance assignment on a world where environmental conditions would make recovery of your remains impossible to verify. You began to modify your power armor's machine spirit, introducing subtle changes to its programming that would allow you to fake your death convincingly. You established hidden supply caches on uninhabited worlds along your planned escape route, stockpiling equipment and resources that would allow you to survive independently of Imperial infrastructure. Most importantly, you began to construct a new identity. Not brother, initiate Severus of the 10th Company, but someone entirely different. Someone who remembered what it meant to be human. The opportunity finally came during your 47th year of service to the chapter. The world of Stygia Undivided was experiencing seismic instability that threatened to destroy the archaeotech facilities buried in its polar regions. Your mission was to conduct a solo infiltration and retrieve critical data from the facilities before the planet's core destabilized completely. It was perfect. Stygia Undivided's electromagnetic storms would interfere with orbital communications, making real-time monitoring impossible. The seismic activity would provide cover for faking your death, and the planet's imminent destruction would eliminate any possibility of investigating the circumstances of your demise. You completed the mission objectives with mechanical efficiency, retrieving the requested data and transmitting it to your strike cruiser via secure channels. Then you activated the contingency plan you had spent years developing. The explosions were carefully calibrated to simulate a catastrophic equipment failure during geological upheaval. Your armor's machine spirit broadcasted a final transmission reporting critical system failures and imminent destruction, followed by electronic silence that suggested complete loss of all communication capabilities. From the chapter's perspective, Brother, Initiate Severus died heroically in service to the Emperor, his sacrifice allowing the recovery of critical archaeotech data that would serve the Imperium for centuries to come. His name was added to the roll of honored dead. His gene, seed-marked for recovery and implantation in future generations of space marines. But Severus hadn't died on Stygia Undivided. He had simply chosen to stop being Severus. The man who crawled from the wreckage of the archaeological complex was someone else entirely. Someone who remembered sunshine and laughter and the taste of real food. Someone who had once been called by a name his mother had chosen with love rather than numbers assigned by military bureaucrats. The escape was harrowing, requiring him to navigate through electromagnetic storms and seismic upheaval, while his modified armor's systems gradually shut down according to the timetable he had programmed. But he reached the hidden supply cache he had established years earlier, shedding his power armor like a snake shedding skin and donning the simple clothes of a merchant spacer. The face that looked back at him from the supply cache's mirror was barely recognizable. Decades of combat stimulants and genetic modification had left their mark, creating features that were handsome in an inhuman way. But the eyes were still his own, older, sadder, but recognizably human. He spent months learning to be human again, practicing expressions and gestures that had been trained out of him during his transformation into a space marine. He learned to eat food for pleasure rather than tactical nutrition, to sleep without remaining partially alert for threats, to experience emotions without immediately analyzing their tactical implications. It was harder than any combat he had ever faced, but gradually, slowly, he began to remember what it felt like to be alive, rather than merely functional. He found work as a technical specialist aboard merchant vessels, using his enhanced capabilities to maintain complex systems, while carefully concealing the full extent of his abilities. He helped people when he could, using his superhuman strength and reflexes to prevent accidents, his tactical knowledge to avoid dangerous situations, his enhanced senses to detect problems before they became critical. But he helped them as a human being making moral choices, not as a weapon following programmed directives. And in the quiet moments between jobs, when his ship drifted through the void between star systems, he wrote in his journal about the boy who had once lived in the tunnels of Mortis Theine, the boy who had kissed a girl behind a promethium refinery and dreamed of seeing real sunlight, the boy who had died screaming in the trials, but somehow managed to leave behind a ghost that remembered what it meant to be human. The Imperium still called, of course. His enhanced hearing could detect the vox, traffic of Imperial vessels across impossible distances, could hear the familiar cadences of tactical communications and battle hymns. Sometimes he was tempted to respond, to return to the certainty of service and the comradeship of his battle brothers. But then he would remember the angels penitent dying in defense of something beautiful, or the fear in civilians' eyes when space marines arrived to protect them, or the hollow quality that came to veterans who had served too long in the Emperor's name. And he would remember that he had made a choice, perhaps the first real choice of his life, to preserve something human in a universe that seemed determined to destroy everything that made life worth living. He was no longer brother. Initiate Severus of the 10th Company, 3rd Squad, Tactical Designation 7, Alpha. He was something else entirely, a former space marine, who had chosen to be human again, carrying within himself the memories of what the Imperium did to its servants in the name of protection and order. He was living proof that even the most thorough indoctrination could not completely destroy the human spirit, that somewhere beneath the layers of conditioning and genetic modification, the capacity for choice survived. He was hope, however small and fragile, that humanity might someday remember what it had lost in its desperate struggle for survival. And in the darkness between the stars, surrounded by the endless war that defined the 41st millennium, that hope was more precious than any relic, more powerful than any weapon, more sacred than any oath. It was the one thing the Imperium could never truly destroy. No matter how many boys it fed into its machinery of transformation and war, the capacity to choose love over duty, mercy over efficiency, hope over despair, the capacity to remain human, even in a universe that had forgotten what humanity meant.